Let's start about immigration, because the way we're reporting from outside of the Congress, at least, is that this is one of the main sticking points in funding the government. What do you expect to be discussed today? Is there a path forward, a bipartisan approach for Democrats and Republicans?
Well, a bipartisan path forward is the only way we're going to address this very important issue, and I hope that it is addressed. We have a number of children in our communities. Our daughter goes to school with many of them who are here in this country through no fault of their own, brought here at a very young age by their parents. This is a situation that most people across the country agree needs to be addressed, that we're not going to hold these children responsible for the acts of their parents. Look, we don't charge our 3-year-old kids for trespass by walking across their parents' lawn. That's what we have to do to address this. But the only way forward, this isn't going to be a partisan fix. This isn't going to be a Republican or Democrat only fix. This has to be bipartisan, bicameral, something the president can sign.
And the president said that he wants Congress to address this. His issue with the way President Obama did it was not done through Congress. He wanted legislation. At the same time, he's been pretty explicit in saying he wants a wall in connection with that. Is that a quid pro quo? Does that need to happen in order to get the Dreamers addressed?
Well, I think you have a number of people who have their demands and what they would prefer in this negotiation. Look, nobody is going to get 100% of their way. The bottom line isn't to try to prevent the president from winning here, or the bottom line isn't trying to prevent the Democrats from winning here. The bottom line is to actually provide and present a solution for these children. And if that means we add additional border security dollars, then that means we add additional border security dollars. I think there's a chance for a reasonable compromise to make sure the president can win, that Democrats can win, that Republicans can win, but most importantly, that these kids, through no fault of their own, who were brought here, can win as well.
And so expound on that just a little bit, Senator. Does that suggest maybe there might be a compromise that didn't necessarily require a physical wall, but that did increase the dollars appropriated for security? There could be physical wall, it could be technology, it could be various things. Is that a way that perhaps this could be bridged?
Well, I think so. And even if you talk to the president, I don't know that he's necessarily talking about a concrete wall everywhere. I think he's talking about a barrier of some kind. I think he's talking about personnel. He's talking about electronic enforcement. That's something that we can provide. Let the administration work that out. Let law enforcement work out what they need. But we shouldn't be opposed to something just because the president wants it. We shouldn't be opposed to something just because Democrats or Republicans say it's key to their negotiations. What we ought to be doing is looking for ways to support security efforts, increases in security dollars that can actually lead to a solution.
So, Senator, expand beyond this now to the general agenda for the Republicans this coming year. There was a big win for the Republicans at the end of last year with the tax overhaul. What is on the agenda? What are the priorities this year that can be accomplished?
Well, I think I was driving to the airport yesterday morning and I heard advertisements on the radio talking about use your tax relief dollars to buy a new car or something like that. I think a lot of Americans, millions of Americans, are going to wake up day after day this next and upcoming year realizing they're taking home more money, and that's a good thing. And so we're going to build on the successes of that tax cut that we passed late last year. We're going to build on that to continue to grow the economy. Not all parts of the economy are as strong as they are in, say, like the Denvers or the Fort Collins, Colorados of the world. And so we're going to build on that success. We're going to hopefully focus on an infrastructure bill. Maybe that's bringing additional dollars into infrastructure. That's also addressing the permit reforms that we need to help projects move forward. That also continues to unwind the regulatory state that took over this regulatory environment the last 8 years. Continue to make progress on a pro-business, pro-economy outlook and policy for us all. If we do that, we're going to see a lot of people across this country succeed in ways that they simply haven't over the past 10 to 15 years.
When we talk about infrastructure, we hear both Democrats and Republicans. That's one issue they seem to agree on. There should be infrastructure. Don't necessarily agree on how to go about it. Is it possible to do a bipartisan bill that doesn't break the budget, perhaps more than it's already been broken?
I think that's the big question. Was this a $200 billion infrastructure plan? If so, how was it funded? Is this $1 trillion infrastructure plan? If so, how is it funded? Obviously, administration officials talk about partnerships with the private sector. They talk about partnerships with local governments and communities. But I think at the bottom of it all, we've got to figure out how to pay for it without bankrupting this already hard-pressed economy, Treasury. And we also have to make sure that we focus on things like permit reform. If you're talking to a county commissioner in Colorado, that county commissioner will tell you they will turn down a federal dollar in order to take a local or state dollar, because they can make that local or state dollar go so much further in terms of building that road than the federal dollar can. It makes no sense. When you have major metropolitan areas across this country that are trying to trade federal dollars for state dollars with their state Department of Transportation simply to get away from federal entanglement, rules, regulations, and overhead, something's wrong. We got to cut out the middleman. We got to cut this a problem that drives up the cost of these when the federal government does these projects, when the federal government does it, and make these dollars go further.
So, Senator, you referred a couple of times to permitting issues when it comes to infrastructure, and that clearly is an issue. You talk to anybody who's in the construction industry, they agree that's a big problem. A lot of those permits are local and state, and that connects me up with cannabis, frankly, and marijuana, because you've been quite outspoken in the change in the Department of Justice policy about enforcing federal laws on marijuana, because you say, in part, it should be left up to the states. Can the federal government preempt when it comes to permits on infrastructure, but not on marijuana?
Well, look, I think when we're talking apples and oranges here, what I'm talking about is the states' rights issue when it comes to the decision that voters made to legalize marijuana. What I'm talking about on the federal permit side are things that clearly are on the federal side that are delaying projects at the local level. So we're talking federal permits that are creating problems at the state side. This is a stateside solution that the federal government has said we can override. So what I'd like to do is allow a states' rights decision to prevail. Look, I oppose the legalization of marijuana. And Colorado voted on it several years back. I opposed that. But the voters spoke. The states were intended to be laboratories of democracy. Colorado finds itself deep in the heart of the laboratory right now. And we should put something forward that allows that experimentation as Colorado proceeds to be allowed without running into the federal government.
So, Senator, is your objection to the change made by Attorney General Sessions a political objection because it will be very unpopular in places like Colorado, or is it a legal objection? Is there any question in your mind that under the Constitution the federal government has the right to have a federal statute on things like marijuana?
Well, I think there's two things at stake here. There's the 10th Amendment of our Constitution that allows those things not enumerated to be in the hands of the state, and also the Interstate Commerce Clause, which says the federal government really doesn't have the ability to regulate intrastate commerce, and clearly Colorado's decision on marijuana is only an intrastate decision. So there's a constitutional framework that is at stake here. But it's also something that I feel very personal about because I was told prior to then Senator Sessions' confirmation as Attorney General that this simply wasn't on the administration's agenda, that this wasn't something that they were going to do. They would not reverse this because even though he doesn't like marijuana, he just doesn't have the room on the broadband, with the broadband on the agenda to get this done. And so I took him at his word, and here we are today making this a very serious announcement just last week with no notification or debate to Congress, no dialogue to Congress, and I think that was a mistake. So I look forward to meeting with the Attorney General to find a way forward to allow states' rights to prevail.
So is there any realistic prospect that Congress could actually overrule the Attorney General?
Well, there certainly is. If you look at the actions that have taken place over the past several years dealing with medical marijuana, Dana Rohrabacher from California has succeeded in the House, at least, in terms of adding a rider on medical marijuana. I'll be discussing with a group of senators today the possibility of expanding that legislation, that amendment, to other areas of states that have legalized marijuana for recreation purposes. This is a discussion that we'll continue to have, and also a broader context that we have to discuss this in terms of what will we do long term, not just a year-by-year appropriations bill, but something that we can actually do to protect those states' rights.